Okay, so here we have a 1991 Ford F-150. So here is the starter. We're going to be pulling it off today. I'm going to show you how to do that. Right there, it's hard to see because there's gunk all over it. And right up here next to that heat shield, there's two bolts that'll remove the starter. And then there's two on the wires here on the front of it. I'm going to start by pulling the battery cables off, and then we will pull these two bolts out, and it slides right out, and I will show you how to do that. So here we want to just compare them, make sure you've got the same thing, which we do. This one's just super fucking dirty. A lot of times you can get by with just replacing the solenoid, but in this case the starter definitely was bad. It needed to be replaced. The teeth here were not coming forward and touching the flywheel so it would start. But yeah, so just compare them, make sure they're the same. This one here says it would prefer you to, it's already got a crimp on there. I want you to just crimp this onto the existing wiring harness and not mess with replacing all of that, which I went ahead and just cut it off the old one, so I had a place to strip to and splice to. So these come off with, I believe it was a 12 millimeter 9/16, my bad, it's 9/16 bolts. I've got a half that goes on this. I believe I had a 12 on the one that was originally on it, so it may be a little bit different. It's pretty easy. I'm going to install the bolts first, and it'll sit up in there just like this. So there's just that bolt hole. That bolt hole, line them up, slide bolts in, tighten her up good. And then there's that big battery wire that I showed you, just slips right back on this nut here. Not the one that has already got a wire going to the starter. Obviously, if we do that, it'll just run the starter. A way you can test to see if your solenoid's bad, and if you need just a solenoid instead of a starter, is you take any piece of metal, a screwdriver, a pair of pliers, and you just short these two solenoids out, and if it starts turning the motor, then it's just your solenoid that needs replaced. If it's like this one would just spin, this motor would spin really fast actually, but these teeth would not come forward and engage and actually crank the motor. So that's why I'm replacing the starter instead of just the solenoid. A lot of people will just replace the whole starter when the solenoid goes out because, I mean, it's all one piece and it's easier, but it's really not a big chore to just replace that. So I'll get this hung on the two bolts, and then we'll show you everything hooked up and cleaned up. Also, if your vehicle is anything like this one that I'm working on, it's going to be a very good idea to get a scraper out and just kind of clean up this whole surface beforehand. Honestly, the best thing to do would be to power wash and deep clean this really good before you even take it apart, but I guess that's the next best thing. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to scrape that up, and just that mating edge, make sure it's nice and clean, and a little bit around it, so when I move stuff around on there, nothing falls in. And but yep, there's the two bolt holes. We'll slap this back together and I'll show you how it's done. Alright, thanks. I almost forgot this. This is just a heat shield. Make sure it goes back on. You will go through starters like crazy if you do not put the heat shield on. They will overheat and they'll only last like a month or two depending on how often you use it and stuff. This guy had to buy this as a replacement. He had somebody work on it, and he said he replaced his starter once a month. And we ended up buying this from Ford several years ago, and we put it back on there, and hell, it's been years since we've replaced it. It's just things age. It actually just sits, it just clips on, pushes on, so I'll put it on last. It actually you need to take it off before you take those bolts out, because it blocks that hole there and prevents you from getting it put on. But just wanted to make sure I reminded you all of that before I put everything back together and forgot about it. So. Alright, so we've got her mounted back up here. I do not know a torque spec for the bolts. You can look it up. Somebody would be more than happy to tell you. I say torque spec is tight. If you just kind of pay attention when you pull stuff apart, you'll know about how tight it was when you pulled it off, and tighten it back up to that, and maybe just a little bit extra every time I put something back together. And especially on something just like a starter like this, that's more than enough. When you go put your wire back on up here, put your wire on, and then your lock washer, and then your nut over the top of it. Same with that. Get her nice and tight. It's always a good idea, put a little dielectric grease on any kind of electrical fitting, whether it be tightening up like this with a bolt, or putting some dielectric grease in your crimp here and putting your wire back on it and crimp it together. It just protects everything, makes it last a while. So this is a 1/2 inch. I'm going to put a socket on and get that tightened up good and healthy, and then we'll be back to crimp this fella together. I'm sure you already know how to do that, but if you don't, I'll explain it a little bit here. Alright, I'll be back in a second. Alright, so I've got this little lead wire going to the starter solenoid here. I took it and stripped it down a little bit. Like I had mentioned before, they were nice enough to build a crimp into this, I guess, and then this is some heat shrink here. So it's pretty simple. You just take the wire here and you push it into the hole there, and then you squeeze the ever-living shit out of it. Crimpers, a lot of strippers have a crimper on it. I've seen people use vice grips. If you can pull it out of the vehicle, I've seen people use a hammer and an anvil. You can use all kinds of different things to crimp it, but just crimpers are nice and simple and easy. And I'll get that put in there, and then we'll heat shrink it, and I'll be back when we're done with that, I guess. Alright, so we crimped it together, good and tight, pulled on it, made sure it was good and tight, and then you just slide the heat shrink down, slide it over it, and heat it up. I used the lighter. Some people use little butane torches, all kinds of different things, heat gun, whatever gets real good and hot. It'll just close around there, and it seals everything up, keeps the moisture off of it, and everything working good. Alright, so we've got this down, or back on, and I need to plug the battery back in, and then we'll give her hell and see if she fires over. And we ought to be doing good. It's pretty simple stuff. Alright, so I just got done connecting the battery back up, but I just want to show you this heat shield real quick. I just set it up over the top of it and pull down. It goes on just that easy, and that just keeps your solenoid nice and cool and working properly, and everything's good. Alright, now I will run and hit the key and show you that we got her done right, I reckon. Alright, we got that starter replaced. That's all there is to it. You go out and get yours done and get your truck back on the road. Make sure you bring that old one back in for a cord charge. Alright, well, later on then, we'll see you next time.